Before I begin, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from. This story, well, it's one I never thought I'd have to tell. My daughter, Clara, the light of my life, told me I was too old for her wedding. Too old. After everything. She and her fiancé, Julian, thought I'd just quietly accept being erased from the most important day of her life, a day they also conveniently expected me to bankroll. They underestimated me. They thought the old woman was finished. But I wasn't. This is how I made them understand, in front of everyone they were trying to impress, exactly whose generosity they were celebrating. My name is Eleanor, and for 68 years, I've tried to live a life of quiet dignity and hard work. My late husband, Robert, and we weren't born with silver spoons. We built everything from the ground up, our small hardware store slowly growing through sheer grit and honest dealings until it provided a comfortable life for us, and more importantly, for our Clara. Robert passed nearly 15 years ago now, a loss that still aches like a phantom limb on cold nights. After he was gone, Clara became my entire world, the vessel for all my hopes and dreams. I poured everything I had into her, the best schools, music lessons she only fleetingly enjoyed, trips abroad I could only dream of at her age. I wanted her to have the world, a world broader and brighter than the one I'd known. And for a long time I thought she appreciated it. She was a sweet girl, or so I believed. Perhaps I was blinded by a mother's love, seeing only the good, only the potential I'd nurtured so carefully. When she met Julian, a young man with a sharp suit and an even sharper eye for opportunity, I was cautiously optimistic. He seemed ambitious, driven. Clara was smitten, and her happiness was, as always, my primary concern. They got engaged a year later, and the wedding planning began almost immediately. It was to be a grand affair, far grander than anything Robert and I ever had. A beautiful country club, a guest list filled with Julian's business contacts and Clara's new, sophisticated friends. I was, of course, expected to contribute. And I did, willingly at first. I dipped into the funds Robert and I had painstakingly saved, the nest egg meant for my own old age, thinking, what better use than to launch my daughter into her new life with joy and security. I transferred a significant sum for the venue deposit, paid for her exquisite designer gown, and assured her I'd cover the catering. "Whatever you need, darling," I'd said, my heart swelling with a familiar, selfless love. Little did I know that in their eyes my usefulness had an expiration date, and it was fast approaching. The first hint of trouble came subtly, like a change in the wind before a storm. Clara's calls became less frequent, her tone more impatient. When she did call, it was usually with a new request, an upgrade to the floral arrangements, a more expensive champagne option. Julian was always in the background, his voice a low murmur, guiding her. I started to feel less like her mother and more like a walking, talking bank account. But still, I brushed it off. Wedding stress, I told myself. She's young. She's just caught up in the excitement. Oh, how wrong I was. The old fool, that was me, not understanding the script had already been rewritten, and my part was being drastically reduced. The day the words were spoken, the ones that still echo in the quietest hours of my night, started like any other Saturday. I'd baked Clara's favorite lemon scones, hoping she and Julian might pop by. They did, but not for scones or motherly affection. They sat stiffly on the sofa Robert and I had chosen together decades ago, a silent testament to a love and partnership they seemed incapable of understanding. Julian did most of the talking, his voice smooth and practiced, like a salesman closing a deal. Clara just fidgeted with a loose thread on her expensive skirt, the one I'd bought her last Christmas. "Eleanor," Julian began, and the use of my first name, so stark and formal, was the first cold shard of ice. "Clara and I have been doing a lot of thinking about the wedding, about the overall aesthetic, the vibe we're going for." I nodded, waiting. "What now? Did they need funds for a pre-wedding photo shoot in Paris?" "It's going to be a very energetic event," he continued, glancing at Clara, who finally looked up, her eyes skittering away from mine. "Lots of our younger friends, people from my firm, a very contemporary crowd. I still didn't understand where this was going. That sounds lovely, dear, I said, trying to keep my voice light. I'm so looking forward to celebrating with you. Then Clara spoke, her voice small, almost a whisper, but each word landed like a hammer blow. Mom, she said, that's kind of the thing. We were thinking, well, Julian and I discussed it, and we feel it might be a bit much for you. My heart stuttered. Much for me? What do you mean, darling? I'm perfectly healthy. Julian leaned forward, a parody of concern on his face. It's not about your health, Eleanor. It's just, you're of a different generation. The music will be loud. People will be up late. We just don't want you to feel uncomfortable or out of place. At my own daughter's wedding, the room started to feel cold. And Clara chimed in, gaining a sliver of confidence from Julian's intervention. Let's be honest, Mom. Most of your friends aren't really our crowd. It would change the dynamic. Then came the final, crushing sentence, delivered by Clara with a forced, apologetic smile that didn't reach her eyes. We just think it would be better for everyone if perhaps you didn't attend. We don't want you to feel, well, you're just a bit too old for this kind of party, Mom. It's for young people too old. The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Too old. My own daughter, whom I had carried, nurtured, and loved with every fiber of my being, was telling me I was an embarrassment, a relic to be hidden away. The scones sat untouched on the coffee table, their sweet scent suddenly cloying, sickening. I looked at Clara, searching for any sign of the little girl who used to cling to my hand, who thought I was the strongest, most wonderful woman in the world. I saw a stranger, her features hard, her eyes reflecting a cold calculation I'd never witnessed before. Julian was watching me, a flicker of something, triumph, in his gaze. In that moment, something inside me, something vital and warm, fractured. The initial shock was so profound, I couldn't even speak. I just stared at them, the silence stretching, amplifying the cruelty of their pronouncement. I don't remember them leaving. One moment they were there, outlining my obsolescence. The next, the front door clicked shut, and I was alone with the ghost of Robert and the fresh, gaping wound in my heart. The lemon scones grew cold. I sat on that sofa for hours, the afternoon light fading to dusk, replaying their words, their faces, Clara's averted gaze, Julian's slick composure. Too old. As if age were a contagious disease, a shameful condition that needed to be quarantined. My mind, a frantic, wounded animal, scurried back through the years. I saw myself, a young widow, working late nights at the store after tucking a small, trusting Clara into bed. I remembered skipping meals so she could have new shoes, forgoing any semblance of a social life, so I could be there for every school play, every scraped knee, every teenage heartbreak. I remembered the pride, fierce and overwhelming, when she graduated college, the degree largely funded by the sale of my mother's modest jewelry and a second mortgage on our home that I'd worked tirelessly to pay off. Had none of that mattered? Was it all so easily dismissed, so casually discarded because my hair was now silver and my steps a little slower? The pain was a physical thing, a crushing weight on my chest that made it hard to breathe. Disbelief warred with a dawning, horrifying clarity. This wasn't just a thoughtless comment born of wedding stress. This was a deliberate exclusion, a calculated severing. Julian's influence was undeniable. He was a man who clearly valued image above all else, and I, her aging mother, didn't fit the glossy picture he was curating for their life. But Clara had agreed. She had delivered the blow. My daughter. The initial wave of grief was followed by a slow, burning anger. It wasn't a fiery, explosive rage, but a deep, cold fury that settled in my bones.
How dare they?
How dare they treat me with such profound disrespect, such utter callousness, after I had given so much? The financial contributions I'd made to this wedding, the wedding I was now barred from, suddenly felt like salt in the wound. I had been so eager, so happy to provide for her, to give her the fairy tale day she dreamed of. And this was my reward? To be deemed an inconvenience, an embarrassment, a relic? The sacrifices I'd made weren't just financial. They were sacrifices of time, of self, of opportunities for my own happiness after Robert died. I had chosen, again and again, to put Clara first. And for what? To be told I was too old to witness her vows? The phrase became a terrible mantra, echoing in my mind. I realized with a sickening lurch that they saw me not as a mother, not as family, but as a resource to be exploited and then discarded when my presence no longer served their ambitions. The love I had poured out so freely had been met not with gratitude, but with a chilling pragmatism. I was useful for my money, but a liability in person. The realization was like a slap in the face, waking me from a long, naive slumber. The next few days passed in a blur of sorrow and simmering indignation. Clara called once, her voice falsely bright, asking about a specific payment schedule for the caterer. She didn't mention their conversation, didn't apologize, didn't even seem to register the monumental cruelty of her pronouncement. It was as if she'd simply checked an unpleasant task off her list, deal with Mom, and moved on. That call, so casually transactional, so utterly devoid of warmth or contrition, was the final, brittle snap. My sadness, deep and aching as it was, began to transmute into something else, resolve. A cold, hard resolve that settled in my stomach like a stone. I would not be erased. I would not be a footnote in my own daughter's life story, especially not when I was underwriting the entire production. If I was too old for her wedding, then perhaps my money was too old as well. But no, that wasn't quite right. The money was already spent or committed. The venue was booked, the dress paid for, the caterer's deposit sent. Pulling the plug financially would cause chaos, yes, but it would also mean Clara wouldn't have her grand wedding, and in some perverse way, that felt like letting them off too easily. They would simply blame the difficult old woman for ruining everything. No, the insult was personal, public, and deeply demeaning. The response, I decided, needed to be equally personal and perhaps a little public too. I thought about Robert. He had a quiet strength, but he never tolerated disrespect, not from anyone. He would have been appalled by Clara's behavior, by Julian's thinly veiled contempt. He would have wanted me to stand up for myself, to reclaim my dignity. The idea started as a small, flickering ember. What if I attended anyway? What if I simply showed up? But the thought of their shock, their potential fury, and the ensuing scene felt messy, undignified in its own way. I wasn't looking for a shouting match. I was looking for justice, for a truth to be acknowledged. Then the real plan began to form, a plan that was less about revenge and more about revelation. They wanted a perfect, glossy wedding, filled with people they wanted to impress. They wanted to present themselves as a golden couple, effortlessly sophisticated. And I, her too old mother, had paid for the stage on which they would perform. The irony was not lost on me. I would not be a ghost at this feast. I would be the one who gently, calmly, lifted the curtain and showed everyone the reality behind the facade. My role in this wedding wasn't over. It was just about to take a very unexpected turn. I stopped crying. The ache in my chest remained, a dull throb, but it was now accompanied by a steely determination. I was no longer just a grieving mother. I was a woman who had been profoundly wronged, and I would not go gentle into that good night of their making. My first step was to meticulously organize every piece of financial documentation related to the wedding. For weeks, I had been making payments, sometimes directly to vendors, sometimes transferring lump sums to Clara's wedding account, which I suspected Julian had more control over than she did. I'd kept surprisingly good records, a habit ingrained from decades of running the hardware store with Robert. Every invoice, every bank transfer confirmation, every canceled check, every scribbled note detailing what a payment was for, I gathered them all. I found a receipt for the deposit on the ludicrously expensive champagne wall Julian had insisted upon, the invoice for the 5-tier cake that probably cost more than my first car, the contract for the string quartet Clara had suddenly decided was essential for the cocktail hour. The pile of papers grew, a tangible testament to my generosity, or, as I was now beginning to see it, my naivety. I spread them out on the dining room table, the same table where Clara had once done her homework, her small hand struggling to form letters. The contrast was stark, painful. Each document was a small piece of the larger picture, the picture of a mother who had given freely and a daughter who had taken freely, and then decided the giver was no longer fit for display. I made copies of everything. 3 sets. One for me, one for, well, I wasn't sure yet, and one as a backup. I bought a new ledger and carefully, methodically listed each expense, the date, the vendor, the amount, and a brief description. The total sum at the bottom of the page was staggering. It was more than I had initially intended to spend, a slow creep of additional costs driven by Julian's desire for opulence and Clara's inability to say no to him, or perhaps her own burgeoning taste for the finer things she didn't have to earn herself. As I worked, a strange sense of calm descended. The meticulous task of organizing the finances was grounding. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about the truth. The numbers didn't lie. They told a story of sacrifice and contribution that Clara and Julian were so eager to erase. During this time, Clara's calls remained infrequent and purely transactional. "Mom, did you send the check to Petal Pushers Floristry yet?" They called saying it's overdue. "No, how are you, Mom?" No acknowledgement of the gaping chasm she had blasted between us. I would reply calmly, "Yes, dear, it was sent last Tuesday." They should have it. I played the part of the compliant, slightly doty old woman, perhaps a little forgetful, but ultimately still useful. Each interaction, each fresh demand veiled as a polite inquiry, only solidified my resolve. They were so confident in my meek acceptance, so assured of my irrelevance beyond my bank balance. Their underestimation was becoming my greatest ally. I found a small, elegant portfolio, the kind one might use for an important presentation. Into this, I placed a curated selection of the most significant receipts and a neatly typed summary sheet detailing the grand total, categorized by vendor. It looked official, undeniable. This portfolio would be my companion on the day. I wasn't planning to disrupt the ceremony itself. That sacred moment, even if I wasn't part of it, felt off-limits for direct confrontation. The reception, however, the grand celebration of their union, paid for by the woman they had unceremoniously uninvited, that was a different matter entirely. That was the stage they had set, and I was merely preparing my lines. One blustery afternoon, I found myself dialing Martha's number. Martha and I had been friends since before Clara was born, a friendship forged in the fires of young motherhood and sustained through decades of life's ups and downs. She was a no-nonsense woman with a kind heart and a sharp tongue when necessary. If anyone would understand, it would be her. "Eleanor, so good to hear from you," she chirped. "How are all the wedding preparations going? You must be bursting with excitement." Her cheerful words were like a small, sharp pinprick to my carefully constructed composure. I took a deep breath. "Martha," I began, my voice trembling slightly. "Can I come over? There's something I need to talk to you about." Something difficult. The concern in her voice was immediate. "Of course, Eleanor. Is everything all right? You sound upset." An hour later, I was sitting in Martha's cozy kitchen, a cup of strong tea warming my hands, the story tumbling out of me. Clara's words, Julian's smugness, the casual cruelty of it all. Martha listened in stunned silence, her usual jovial expression hardening into one of disbelief, then outright indignation. When I finished, recounting the too-old comment, she slammed her hand down on the table, making the teacups rattle. "Too old," she exclaimed, her voice vibrating with anger. "That ungrateful little. And after everything you've done for her, I've a mind to go over there and give that girl and her jumped-up fiancé a piece of my mind." Her outrage, so fierce and immediate, was a balm to my bruised spirit. It validated my pain, my anger. It made me feel less alone. I then told her about my plan, the portfolio of receipts, the intention to make a statement at the reception. She listened intently, her sharp eyes fixed on mine. "Good for you, Eleanor," she said quietly when I'd finished. "Good for you. It's not about revenge, is it? It's about dignity. It's about the truth. They can't be allowed to just sweep you under the rug after you financed their entire charade. Her support was unwavering. She didn't try to talk me out of it, didn't suggest I take the high road by simply disappearing. She understood the profound nature of the disrespect. "What can I do to help?" she asked. Just knowing she was in my corner, that she understood, was help enough. We talked for hours that afternoon, going over the details. Martha, with her practical mind, asked questions I hadn't fully considered. How would I get into the reception if I wasn't on the guest list? What if they tried to have me removed? We brainstormed. I still had the original invitation, sent before the fateful conversation. It was generic enough that it didn't have individual names tied to a master list, just a beautifully printed card requesting the pleasure of my company. The irony was bitter. "Just walk in like you own the place, dear," Martha advised. "Because, in a way, you do." We even rehearsed what I might say, Martha playing the part of a startled guest, then a supportive one. Her friendship, during those dark days, was a lifeline. She reminded me of my strength, the resilience I'd shown throughout my life. She helped me see that this wasn't an act of bitterness, but an act of self-preservation, a reclaiming of my narrative. As I left her house that evening, the wind seemed less biting, the path ahead a little clearer. I wasn't just a scorned mother. I was a woman with a plan and a loyal friend by her side, even if only in spirit on the day itself. The wedding day loomed, a date on the calendar that had once filled me with joyful anticipation, now approached with a mixture of dread and steely resolve. A week before, a small, impersonal package arrived by courier. Inside was a ridiculously expensive cashmere shawl, a bland card signed in Clara's perfect script and Julian's ostentatious scrawl. "Thinking of you, Mom. Sorry you can't be with us. Hope this keeps you warm." The condescension was breathtaking. A consolation prize for the mother they had discarded. It was like a pat on the head for a dog you were leaving behind. I folded the shawl neatly and placed it in the box it came in, intending to donate it to a charity shop. It felt tainted. Their gesture, meant perhaps to assuage some tiny flicker of guilt they might possess, only fueled the quiet fire of my determination. The audacity was almost comical. They banned me from the wedding but still felt entitled to send a gift, as if that somehow balanced the scales of their cruelty. I spent the final days in a state of strange calm. The emotional turmoil had settled into a focused energy. I rehearsed my short speech, not to memorize it word for word, but to internalize the core message, the calm delivery I aimed for. I didn't want to sound hysterical or vindictive. I wanted to sound like a woman stating undeniable facts, a woman reclaiming her dignity with quiet power. I chose my outfit carefully, a classic navy blue dress, elegant and understated, the one Robert had always said made my eyes look like sapphires. I added a string of pearls he'd given me on our 25th anniversary. These were my armor, symbols of a genuine love and a life of substance, a stark contrast to the superficiality I was about to confront. I pictured the scene, the lavish country club, the hundreds of guests Julian and Clara were so eager to impress, the carefully curated image of success and happiness. And then me, the uninvited, too old mother, holding the truth in a simple portfolio. On the morning of the wedding, the sun shone with a painful brightness. I imagined Clara, attended by her bridesmaids, perhaps feeling a momentary pang of something, or perhaps not. Perhaps she was entirely consumed by the excitement, by Julian's flattery, by the perfect illusion they were about to present to the world. I didn't call her. What was there to say? I made myself a cup of tea and ate a piece of toast, just like any other day. But it wasn't any other day. It was the day I would stop being a silent victim and become the author of my own next chapter. My portfolio of receipts and the neatly typed summary sat on the hall table, ready. I had Martha on standby, just a phone call away if I needed to talk before or after. Her steadfast support was a quiet comfort. As the time for the reception approached, a wave of nervousness washed over me, but beneath it, the bedrock of my resolve held firm. This wasn't just for me. It was for every person who had ever been made to feel small, invisible, or too old by those who should have cherished them most. I arrived at the Willow Creek Country Club as the late afternoon sun began to dip, casting long shadows across the manicured lawns. Guests were already milling about on the terrace, champagne flutes in hand, the sound of laughter and the string quartet, the one I'd paid for, drifting on the breeze. It was every bit as opulent as I'd imagined, a monument to Julian's ambition and Clara's acquiescence. My heart hammered against my ribs, but I clutched my portfolio and walked towards the entrance with a steady gait, the original invitation in my handbag, though I hoped I wouldn't need to present it. A young woman with a clipboard and an overly bright smile stood at a welcome table. "Welcome to Clara and Julian's wedding," she chirped. "May I have your name?" "Eleanor Vance," I said, my voice calmer than I felt. She scanned her list. I don't seem to have an Eleanor Vance here," she began, a slight frown appearing. Before she could question further, I simply smiled serenely and said, "Oh, I'm sure it's an oversight, dear. I'm the mother of the bride." Her eyes widened slightly, a flicker of confusion. "Oh, of course, Mrs. Vance. Please go right in," and just like that, I was in. The underestimation continued to serve me well. No one expects the mother of the bride to be deliberately excluded. I found a discreet spot near the back of the grand ballroom, where tables were lavishly decorated with towering floral arrangements. "Pedal pushers floristry," I noted grimly. I watched as Clara and Julian made their grand entrance, beaming, waving, basking in the applause. Clara looked radiant in her expensive gown, the one whose invoice was neatly filed in my portfolio. Julian looked insufferably smug, his arm possessively around my daughter's waist. They looked like the perfect couple, the stars of their own expensive movie. I felt a pang, not of regret for my plan, but of deep sorrow for the daughter I had lost, the relationship that had been so carelessly shattered. The dinner service began, course after course of exquisitely presented food. I nursed a glass of water, the rich aromas doing little to tempt my appetite. Then came the speeches. The best man, one of Julian's slick colleagues, gave a toast filled with sycophantic praise for Julian's business acumen. One of Clara's bridesmaids gushed about how Clara had found her prince, then Julian stood up, microphone in hand. He thanked his parents, his new in-laws, pointedly not looking in my direction, assuming I wasn't there, and then launched into a self-congratulatory monologue about their future. Clara followed, her voice a little breathless. She thanked Julian for being so wonderful, thanked her friends, thanked the vendors for creating such a magical day. She even gave a cursory thank you to everyone who helped make this possible, her gaze sweeping vaguely over the room. Not once was my name mentioned. Not a hint of acknowledgement for the woman who had, quite literally, made the entire event possible. That was my cue. My heart was pounding, but my hands were steady as I picked up my portfolio. As the applause for Clara's speech died down, and before the band could strike up, I began to walk towards the front of the room, towards the head table. A few heads turned. Julian, seeing me approach, frowned, a look of annoyance quickly masked. Clara's eyes widened in genuine shock. "Excuse me," I said, my voice clear and carrying surprisingly well in the sudden hush that fell over the room as people sensed something unusual was happening. "Excuse me, everyone. Clara, Julian." I reached the head table. Julian stood up, attempting to block me, a furious whisper on his lips. "What do you think you're doing?" I ignored him. "Before the celebrations continue," I announced, my voice gaining strength, "there's something rather important that seems to have been overlooked in all the thank yous." I opened my portfolio. "My daughter Clara and my new son-in-law Julian have spoken of this magical day. And it truly is beautiful. Such beauty, of course, comes at a cost." A wave of murmurs rippled through the room. Clara's face had gone from shocked to horrified. Her cheeks were flushed a burning red. Julian looked like he was about to explode, his carefully constructed composure shattering. He tried to take the microphone from the stand, but I simply picked it up myself. My hand was surprisingly steady. "I am Eleanor Vance," I stated, my voice resonating with a calm authority I didn't know I possessed. "For those of you who don't know me, I am Clara's mother. The mother who, I was told, was too old, to attend this youthful, energetic wedding, gasps rippled through the crowd. I saw some of Julian's business associates exchange uncomfortable glances. Some of Clara's friends looked mortified.
Good.
However, I continued, my gaze sweeping across the stunned faces. It seems I wasn't too old to finance it. I lifted the summary sheet from my portfolio. This beautiful venue, the Willow Creek Country Club?
Paid for by me.
The deposit, the final balance. Receipt number WC 47B, for those interested in specifics. I paused, letting that sink in. Clara was now staring at her plate, unable to meet anyone's eyes. Julian's jaw was clenched so tight, I thought his teeth might crack. The exquisite gown Clara is wearing? A lovely choice, dear. Also paid for by me. Invoice from Bridal Dreams Boutique, dated March 12th. The 5-tier cake you'll all be enjoying shortly from Decadent Delights? My treat. As were the pedal pushers' floral arrangements that adorn every table. And let's not forget the champagne wall Julian was so keen on. Yes, that too. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The shocked silence in the room amplified every word. In fact, I said, looking directly at Clara, then at Julian, the grand total for this magical day, a day I was deemed too old and embarrassing to be a part of, comes to precisely $78,452.17. All drawn from the savings my late husband Robert and I worked our entire lives to accumulate. Savings I was happy to share, for what I thought would be a joyous occasion for my daughter. I placed the portfolio gently on the head table, in front of Clara. Here are the records, my dears. Perhaps when you're writing your thank you notes, you'll remember who truly made this all possible. Clara finally looked up, tears streaming down her face, a look of utter devastation and humiliation in her eyes. Julian was puce, speechless for once in his life. Some guests were openly staring, others whispering furiously. I saw a few older women nodding slowly, a look of grim understanding on their faces. My friend Martha, had she been there, would have been cheering. I took a deep breath. I wish you both the life you deserve, I said, the meaning clear to anyone paying attention. I may be too old for your wedding, Clara, but I clearly wasn't too old to provide it. Enjoy the rest of your evening, everyone, and with that, I turned, and with my head held high, my pearls a comforting weight against my skin, I walked out of the ballroom, leaving behind a stunned silence, a humiliated bride and groom, and the undeniable, expensive truth. The string quartet, ironically, chose that moment to strike up a Johnny tune, a surreal soundtrack to the implosion of their perfectly curated image. The cool night air felt like a balm on my flushed cheeks as I walked to my car. My hands were trembling now, the adrenaline slowly ebbing away, leaving a profound sense of exhaustion, but also, undeniably, a sense of release. It was done. The truth was out. I hadn't shouted. I hadn't caused a scene in the way they might define it. No hysterics, no accusations beyond the factual. I had simply stated what was, with the receipts to prove it. As I drove away from the Willow Creek Country Club, its glittering lights receding in my rearview mirror, I imagined the chaos I'd left behind. The hurried whispers, the awkward condolences, the frantic attempts by Clara and Julian to salvage the evening, to explain away the inconvenient, too old mother who had just exposed the financial reality of their grand charade. I didn't feel triumphant, not in a gleeful, vindictive way. Instead, I felt a quiet, almost solemn satisfaction. I had reclaimed my voice, my dignity. I had refused to be erased. The next few days were quiet. My phone remained silent. No angry calls from Julian, no tearful apologies from Clara. It was as if a bomb had gone off, and they were still sifting through the wreckage. Martha called, of course, having heard a garbled version from a distant cousin of a guest who had been there. "Eleanor, you legend," she crowed. "Tell me everything." Recounting it to her, I felt the last vestiges of tension ease. Her unreserved approval was a comfort. Weeks turned into a month. The beautiful, expensive cashmere shawl they had sent as a pity gift went to a local women's shelter, along with a generous donation. I started clearing out some of Clara's old things from her childhood bedroom, items I had held onto for far too long. It felt like an emotional spring cleaning. The pain of her betrayal was still there, a scar that would likely always remain, but it no longer consumed me. It was a part of my story, not the entirety of it. I learned through the grapevine, small towns have their ways, that the fallout for Clara and Julian had been significant. Many of Julian's business associates, men and women who valued family and integrity, were reportedly unimpressed by the spectacle of a couple who would treat a parent and a benefactor with such contempt. Their carefully constructed image had been irrevocably tarnished. Their magical day was now remembered for all the wrong reasons. I heard Clara had been devastated, mortified by the public humiliation. Part of me, the mother part that never truly dies, felt a flicker of sorrow for her pain. But the stronger part, the part that had been so deeply wounded, knew this was a consequence of her own actions, her own choices. She had sown the wind, and she was reaping the whirlwind. I wasn't waiting for an apology. If it came, I would listen, but forgiveness would be a long, arduous road, if it was possible at all. The trust had been shattered too profoundly. Life began to settle into a new rhythm. The silence from Clara's end of the line was no longer a painful void, but a quiet space I started to fill with other things. I reconnected with old friends I'd neglected during the years I was so focused on Clara. I joined a book club, started volunteering at the local library, something I'd always wanted to do. I even booked a small cruise to Alaska, a trip Robert and I had talked about but never taken. The money I had spent on the wedding was gone, a significant sum. But what I had gained in return, my self-respect, my peace of mind, was priceless. I realized that for too long, my identity had been Clara's mother. Now, I was rediscovering Eleanor. A woman with her own interests, her own worth, independent of her role as a parent. One afternoon, about 3 months after the wedding, there was a hesitant knock on my door. It was Clara alone. She looked pale, thinner, the radiant confidence of her wedding day completely gone. She carried a small, wilting bouquet of flowers. "Mom," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Can I come in?" I stepped aside. She sat on the edge of the sofa, the same sofa where she and Julian had delivered their cruel edict. The silence stretched. I don't know what to say," she finally managed, tears welling in her eyes. "What you did, it was awful. For us. But I understand why you did it. I was terrible to you." She spoke of Julian's relentless pressure, his obsession with image, but she also, to her credit, took responsibility for her own complicity. "I let him convince me," she said, "but the words, the decision to exclude you, that was mine too. I was weak and cruel, and I am so sorry, Mom." Her apology felt genuine, born of months of reflection and consequence. I listened quietly. The anger I had felt was a distant echo now, replaced by a profound sadness for what we had lost. "Thank you for saying that, Clara," I said. "I appreciate your apology. There was no grand reconciliation, no immediate return to how things were. Too much had been broken. But it was a start, a tiny crack of light in a very dark room. I didn't invite her to stay for tea. When she left, I wasn't sure if or when I would see her again. My life was no longer revolving around her. I had my friends, my books, my upcoming trip to Alaska. I had found a measure of peace, a quiet satisfaction in knowing I had stood up for myself, that I had valued my own dignity above all else. The wedding, the betrayal, the dramatic reveal, it had all been a painful, necessary catalyst for me to reclaim my own life. I was no longer just the too-old mother. I was Eleanor Vance, a woman who knew her worth and who was, finally, living for herself. And that, I realized, was the most valuable thing of all. Thank you for listening to my story. Please, let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories.